Hey everybody, and welcome to Beyond the Trailer Park for March 11th, 2019. This is episode 187, and oops.
Somebody left their speakers on.
Yeah, that was me. The joy of running on one computer. But as you can tell, I am having some tech issues, so we have no intro, outro. There will be no twats or slideshow. That's why you all can see me tonight. I don't know what happened, and I didn't want to mess with it. So hopefully you are all hearing this. If you can't, let us know. I have Morgan watching to see if we are coming through. So tonight we have with us Miss Morgan. How are you doing?
Doing all right.
Work going well?
Yeah, it's going. It's a lot of lawsuits.
Yeah, I can imagine. And Miss Sam from the frozen, well, maybe not so frozen anymore, tundra of Ontario. How are you, Sam?
Apparently, I'm the main feature on the YouTube Live. If you watch it there, all y'all are minimized. It's just me up on the screen. So, I'll be the whole show tonight if that's what y'all want. But, you might want to click on that, Beth.
There we go. I think that works. I don't know. I'm still figuring this tech stuff out. I don't know how Deb did it because...
It is frozen and tundra. Yes, it's terrible. There you go. You got it. Yeah, you got it.
Okay. The learning curve for doing the techie stuff is like just astronomical. That's why I didn't mess with anything with the XSplit being down. So, and joining us from Alberta, am I correct on that, Kathy?
Yes.
Is Kathy Dawson, who is, how shall we put it, an educator?
Activist.
Activist?
And board member.
Okay, that works. And Kathy's here to, she's with the Alberta Pro-Choice Coalition and Abortion Rights Coalition of Canada. And yes, we are going to talk pro-choice tonight. So, before we begin, there was an article that I had read, and I have read lots of articles for this week to the point that I burnt myself out, from Jody Jacobson, and she was writing for Rewire News. And why I think what we're going to present tonight is important is she states, quote, media coverage of abortion care in the United States, and Kathy will speak to specifically Canada, is, to be blunt, abysmal. Too much news coverage and analysis of abortion is devoid of fact and instead relies on the faulty premise that the abortion debate involves two sides arguing in good faith, when in reality, one side is rooted in evidence and clinical experience, and the other is flat-out lies and ideology. And that's something I have over time come to agree with, because a lot of what we're going to talk about tonight is besides what she is advocating for up in Canada, is very similar to what we advocate down here in the States. So hopefully we'll be able to get to the heart of the matter, so to speak, but not so much as journalists would, which was the gist of the Rewire article, but as lay people. So, Kathy, welcome to Beyond the Trailer Park. And can you just tell us a little bit about yourself that you're comfortable with?
Okay, I've always been pro-choice, but I really had an opportunity to take a stand when I found out there was a pregnancy care center teaching sex ed in my daughter's public school class. And they wouldn't let me withdraw her. And after that, we filed a human rights complaint, and we just blasted on social media constantly because this group was in there shaming the kids, telling girls they should watch what they wear, creating doubt about the use of contraception, posting inflammatory things about Planned Parenthood. It was really horrendous. It was so fear-based and also wrapped up in purity culture, which is not great either. I had assumed my daughter was going to get comprehensive, accurate, inclusive sex ed, and we sat there in the class and she shut down LGBT questions, said we're not here to talk about it. So it was quite a frustrating process. And long story short, the school board came up with the best sex ed policy I've seen yet, embracing LGBT inclusive sex ed, embracing comprehensive sex ed, and putting the pregnancy care center right out of the schools. And since then, we've managed to get them kicked out of Calgary schools. And I signed up with Alberta Pro-Choice because I wanted a provincial representation. But before then, I'd already contacted Abortion Rights Coalition as well. So I'm on both boards, and we do a lot of advocacy, a lot of education. And right now we're giving people the tools they need to fight back against anti-choice misinformation. So we've been able to get anti-choice ads removed by Canada ad standards. So all those horrible billboards and whatnot, gone. Working with the municipalities to remove the advertisements from the transits, and the buses and whatnot. And that's been going well. And they've been losing up here because we did a study as part of Abortion Rights Coalition of all the crisis pregnancy centers across Canada. And because I'm a numbers gal, we found their tax returns. And so we got to look at how much money they're making across Canada, and more importantly, how much money they were getting from the government across Canada. So through our activism, we got the federal funding removed from anti-choice groups, and we're working on the provinces across the country. Municipalities have been a little bit more difficult, but yeah, they're losing money. So that's kind of how I got into all this, was by the sex ed, and now I've had to learn all different aspects of the sex ed and do a deep dive on things, and I'm like, abortion rights is where I want to be fighting to maintain it. And before all this, I thought, oh, it's no big deal, everybody has access, and I'm learning that not everybody has access. In fact, a lot of people don't have access and they don't have choice. They take your choice away when they give you abstinence ed. And the most shocking thing to discover was that these groups oppose pregnancy prevention. It's just mind-boggling, because one would think if you don't like abortion, you'd be working to reduce the circumstances that put people where they need to do that, right? But no, they're against contraception too.
Yeah, that's a similar problem down here in the States. Is abstinence only seems to be what many are teaching in the schools via religious right groups, and
it's state law here.
Yeah, it is state law, and it's like
abstinence only.
Yeah, and it's like, don't you want to prevent the pregnancies? That way, we wouldn't have to have abortion. I mean, in the manner they think we have abortion, which we'll get eventually. But yeah, and like I said before we went live, I mean, for many years, I had a very idealistic view of Canada, and that was based on my travels when I lived in Hamilton while I was playing hockey. So we're going back 30 years, at least. Yeah. And it really wasn't until recently that my notion got dinged up. You know, I realized that the problems that we have here in the States are slowly infiltrating. I was aware of the anti-LGBT rhetoric via Scott Lively and Peter LaBarbera and all those creepy people. But, you know, now, like in Sam's province, she's dealing with a mini Dayglow man in Ford. So, you know, realizing this is not just a U.S. problem, but also a Canadian problem, and most likely worldwide in some instances. you know, I didn't realize it until my circle began to grow online, especially because I live in a little hick town here in Pennsylvania. So, yeah, they're all pretty much pro or anti-abortion here. But so you kind of answered my next question of what prompted you to follow that path. So we'll skip that question. But
Sure.
and just full disclosure, I did send Kathy an outline of what we were going to present, because this is a huge, to borrow a word, huge, that's how he says it, topic. And I didn't realize it. I mean, I kind of knew, but I really didn't realize how big this, just the myth alone that the right likes to throw out there, or anti-abortionists like to throw out there, and how unfactual, if that's a word, they, you know, really are. And I'm sorry, but you can go online and find the truth, so to speak. So they have to know that they are outright lying. And that's, I think, what really, after going through all the stuff I reviewed for this week, I was like, I can't do this anymore. I was like, by Thursday, I was burned out, but I was tired too from work. So, I mean, what do you foresee, like, especially in Canada, since you're a wee bit behind us as far as religious bullshit, for you guys in Canada fighting the anti-abortionists or the anti-pro-choice?
Well, we call them anti-choice because of their opposition and LGBT. Well, LGBT isn't a choice, but they're like all wrapped up into rights, anti-sexual and health rights. They don't like anything to do with orientation or gender identity. So they're all wrapped up together, but people would be shocked to find out some of these groups would like to see contraception criminalized again and made inaccessible. Because, but they don't want the mainstream to know that's what they're against. So they call the pill, the IUD, and Plan B abortifacients, which just shows how ignorant they are of reproduction information. Because what they're basically saying is that you can have an abortion before you're pregnant. It's laughable. And I really wish that the media would call them on that and say, so you're against abortion. What are you doing to prevent the unwanted pregnancies? Because we all know that there's two reasons to have an abortion. One is I have a pregnancy I don't want, or I have a wanted pregnancy and there's something really bad going on, whether it's a fetal abnormality or a risk to the pregnant person's health. So there's two reasons, and they don't do anything to prevent either one. They're opposing sex ed, they're opposing contraception, and they're not putting, what if they put all this money into preventing fetal abnormalities, educating people about folic acid and whatnot? But they really don't care about the fetus or the embryo. They don't. It's just a method to control women and others that can get pregnant.
Well, I know.
And so did I do? Yeah.
In one argument or discussion I had, I posed the question to the anti-choice person. I said, okay, I'm standing on a cliff. In one hand, I have a petri dish full of zygotes. In the other hand, I have a fully formed live baby of 3 months. You can only save one. Which one? Not only did they try to change the parameters of my scenario, they didn't answer me because they couldn't.
Yeah.
And it's like, and that's the, I mean, they did everything to say, well, if I shoot you and you don't fall out, I said, that's not an option. I said, you have a choice. That's it. You either choose the zygotes or you choose the baby. And they refused the answer. And I've seen a stronger variation of that same story being used, and the gentleman that posted it was like 99 out of 100 times no, they wouldn't answer because they couldn't. And it's like, yeah, they're forced birth, but after the birth they want nothing to do with the child. It's like,
exactly. And even during the pregnancy, they really want nothing to do with the products of conception, because where is their advocacy for housing and food and supports for pregnant people? Those always come with strings. We have a saying that myself and another activist are, nothing is free at a CPC, because all those diapers come with religious strings attached, and they've usually manipulated someone out of their choice as well.
yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a product of the system. And one argument I've used for people that are like, well, they have other options. They can give the baby up for adoption. And I'm like, yeah, that might work, but what about the other 375,000 children that are currently in our foster care system that are available for adoption?
Well, and I'd also add to that, it is not my responsibility to gestate a fetus for 9 months to give it up to someone that's infertile. Sorry, that is not my responsibility to fill other people's homes with babies. You know?
It's like, yeah, I mean, I was lucky. My biological mother was 15 when she had me. I was adopted pretty much at birth. I was about, I think, 3 months by the time the paperwork actually went through. But my parents had 4 years prior, before my brother was born, had gone through all the rigmarole of adoption, because my mom had 5 miscarriages before she had my brother. Now, this was back in the 60s. So she started trying to get pregnant immediately after Dad and her got married in 1955. So it's like, it's something that I've always followed, and I just find it comical that there's 375 children available. We don't need any more. I mean, not to belittle the birth of a child, but I think one of the things you brought out when I was talking with you back and forth and we were hashing out ideas for tonight is, well, 2 points. One, the medical definition of abortion and dispelling the notion of abortion as contraception. And we'll come back. Second point. Now, I couldn't find a definitive or a very succinct definition per the AMA, but you provided a Canadian Medical Association definition of what their position on what they call induced abortion. And I thought it was pretty clear. And their position basically is induced abortion is the active termination of a pregnancy before fetal viability. Now, if you're familiar, I don't know your definition of fetal viability up in Canada, but here it's generally around 22, 24 weeks of pregnancy.
They've got a bit different view on that, because according to the Canadian Medical Association, you can't attach viability to gestation. That's only one of the criteria. So you look at maybe about 23, 24 weeks. A healthy fetus maybe could survive outside of the uterus, but there's also other considerations that turn up later in the pregnancy, such as fetal anencephaly and other diseases, and that make it incompatible with life. So you could be beyond those weeks and still fall under the definition of abortion. So, for example, you had went for an ultrasound, you found out that your fetus has no brain, which is anencephaly, they're missing most of their brain. An induced labor and delivery would be considered an abortion, because it's an early termination of a non-viable pregnancy.
Right.
But this looks so much different than the picture that the anti-choice try and portray with their graphic pictures. When you look at the Canadian stats, 90% of abortions are done at the embryo stage, which is 12 weeks or prior. And then you have, it's 0.59 or 0.6%. So 0.6% of all abortion across Canada is due to these fetal abnormalities or life risk to the pregnant person.
And I think the stats are similar here in the US.
Yeah.
So, and then a second point, and I'm using the smaller version of the whole article that you sent me. So, the decision to perform an induced abortion is a medical one, made confidentially between the patient and her physician within the confines of existing Canadian law. And I love that because that's basically how I look at it. It's not a moral, it's a medical decision, plain and simple. It's nobody's fucking business outside the possible partner, you know, whether they're married, unmarried, maybe pertinent family members, and the doctor. That's it. And they, you know,
exactly. If they wanted to look at morality, whose morality? People have a wide variety of morals that are perfectly acceptable. And it can be a moral decision to have an abortion, because if you know that you're going to force a child into a situation of poverty where they're not wanted by their parents, is that moral? I don't think that's moral. There can be mitigation for poverty to help people out, but if your parent doesn't want you, that's not a way to live.
Oh. And then a third point they noted is the decision is made after conscientious examination of all other options, which you just alluded to. Induced abortion requires medical and surgical expertise and is a medical act, which is kind of almost restating the point before, it being a medical one. But it goes to the point you had just made that, you know, there are caveats to what happens. I mean, depending on... And then the fourth bullet point, basically, it should be performed only in a facility that meets approved medical standards, not necessarily a hospital. And that's a big thing here in the States, with them making laws where, and Morgan, jump in on this because I know I'm going to fuck it up, where some states are making it that you only can have it done in a, like a, not necessarily a hospital, but the clinic has to be surgically approved.
Yes, and also the doctors will have to have admitting privileges, which is a problem here in the States, especially as hospitals are merging with one another. Particularly Catholic hospitals are buying up a lot of other more secular hospitals, or at least hospitals where they would maybe perform an abortion. So they're not going to give those doctors admitting privileges at all. So, and they make these laws to where it's like, well, you have to have admitting privileges within a hospital 50 miles away, and things like of that nature. And that's what this law that the Supreme Court, you know, decided not to hear the case on, where essentially it would have shut down every abortion clinic in Louisiana except for one in New Orleans, which is crazy. And in my state currently, we only have one in Jackson, Mississippi. I worked across from it, had a bunch of forced birth people come outside, harass me and my customers, and I'd be like, I'm just trying to sell chicken tender baskets. Can you like chill? But yeah, they'd come beat on my car and all kinds of stuff. But yeah, so this whole notion of this whole admitting privileges, like, there's no need for it. There really isn't. And even then, usually it's, you know, even if you can get admitting privileges, they come up with something else to shut you down, where, like now in Mississippi, the legislature passed a fetal heartbeat, you know.
So I have lots to say about that one.
Yeah, 6 weeks. Yeah, which most people don't even know they're pregnant until
12
or later. Yeah, exactly. So it's already, yeah, it's already stopped. And I think what they're counting on here is, obviously to overturn it. But, it's almost, and it's to this point where here, they did say in Casey, lesser, not as well known as Roe, but a pretty big one, that, states do have an interest in whether they want to protect the life of the unborn, as they call it, or whatever. But as long as it's not an undue burden. But here's the thing: they kept putting burdens, more and more burdens on women and people getting pregnant, and saying, "Oh, well, it's not undue." And so, it came to a point where, again, there's another case in 2016, that's where we get Whole Women's Health out in Texas, where, women were having to travel across to New Mexico. And people were still saying, oh, well, that's not an undue burden. Yes, it is. If I have to travel outside of my own state to get access to basic health care, yes, it is. And then also, a lot of places have this 48-hour waiting period. I think we had that in Mississippi. It's either 48 or 72, and you have to take off work, and you have to travel, and then you have to pay for it, and all this, that, and the other. And it got to the point where they were like, yes, the burden's undue, and they made that decision, but the states are still trying. And it's honestly at the point where I'm like, you know what? I think it should be something similar to the Voting Rights Act, where before that was completely gutted, if you had a history of restricting certain rights, then you had to go to the Department of Justice and get approval before you pass a state law that had anything to do with voting rights. And I think the same should be done probably for abortion, because these states clearly show they don't care what the Constitution says. They don't care what the Supreme Court says. They're going to keep on trying to overturn it, and they don't care how many women die in the process.
Yeah. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, Kathy, but you don't have to deal with that kind of shit, do you? As far as
No. I believe you can just go straight down to the clinic and get, if you want the counseling there, you can, but there's doctors there, and you can just get it done. There's no waiting period. But with MIFI, they have to take the pill, and then I think they have to check in a few days when they take the second set of pills. But I'm so curious about the clinics, because in Edmonton, we have day patient clinics that do gum surgery, they do vasectomies, they do wisdom teeth, and they wouldn't, it would be an unfair burden to them to have admitting privileges. So do you have anything like that in your states that way with, but not the clinics?
Yeah, so it seems to be, they are definitely picking on the clinics here. When they do that, because I have never seen a lawsuit filed over, just a dentist clinic where they're like, the dentist has to have admitting privileges to St. Dominic's or something. I have never seen anything like that. So, I'm guessing, I haven't seen anything like that, so I'm guessing probably not. It seems to be that they're picking particularly on these clinics, and then they guise it in the form of, oh, of course, either they're straight out with it, this is a way to restrict abortions because we don't like it when people get them, or they dress it in this language of, oh, well, it's to provide safe and healthy abortions, wink, wink.
Yeah.
So, yeah, because they're like, what if someone dies? And I mean, a colonoscopy is safer than, or is more dangerous than an early term abortion.
Right. You know something the aunties also don't want to talk about? There was one time I posted all the risks to keeping a pregnancy and what women go through, and other people that can get pregnant, what they go through in that 9 months. And the aunties would very much like us all to believe that we're just donating a uterus, just a location for 9 months. But it uses your entire body, right?
Yeah, here we have a crisis.
In your liver and your lungs and your heart and your circulatory system.
Well,
and
point blank, if I were raped and got pregnant, it would kill me.
Yeah.
And I have talked to people who are like, well, that's your problem, not mine. I'm like, no, it's not my problem.
They really don't care about the host, though.
No, they don't. In fact, wasn't it just last week, Congress critter or state critter basically said we are hosts, that women are just hosts. That's it.
Yeah, I'd heard that.
Yeah, I can't remember who it was, and I think it was in Florida because I remember the one headline, and it was basically only in Florida would they say something like that, and it's like, no, it's not just being a host. I mean, like you said, Kathy, it's our whole body is subjected to the trials of pregnancy and childbirth. I mean, it's
Yeah.
not not just, I mean, for me, I mean, I'm diabetic. I've had 2 strokes. So I suffer from high blood pressure. I've had blood clots. I mean, I'm literally too small in the pelvic area, so I would have to have a C-section. I wouldn't be able to birth it naturally, or if I wanted to split my pelvis, I could, but that would be really sucky. But yeah, and they don't care. It's
And
like,
here we have a
No.
crisis. It's even like in Mississippi, particularly in the Delta region, and particularly amongst Black women, there is a maternal mortality crisis right now. And no one, and these pro-life people are doing nothing to address it. It's happening in Texas. It's happening all across the South, where our mortality rates here in Mississippi are that of, what people would think of as third world countries. If you do the comparison, and no one is caring about that. So when people are like, oh, well, you can just give the baby up for adoption. No, there are risks. I mean, there's always a risk, but now particularly it's very dangerous to have a child in Mississippi.
yeah. Well,
I would propose that the aunties don't care about the host, and they don't care about the baby that comes out, and they don't care about the fetus.
yeah.
This is all about just controlling women and other people that can get pregnant. It's to control their bodies.
Yeah. But I'm trying to, as I put in my notes, figure out a good direction to go. And
you want to talk about fetal heartbeats?
Well, I want to hit one topic before we miss it, and then we'll come back to fetal heartbeat.
Okay.
But one of the comments that I've alluded to numerous times in the last couple of weeks, because it was on one of our videos, basically boiled down to, once you take out the religious and the, quote, moral rhetoric, this question: how can we support choice? Is it not murder? Or is it not a crime? Now, my standard response, and I will be honest, the pro-choice or the abortion decision has never been an issue I've wrestled with personally, because I believe it was settled in 1973 with Roe v. Wade, and then later Planned Parenthood versus Casey in 1992. And, it's settled law. And as I have said to various adversaries, that I don't care whether a person gets an abortion or not. What I care about is people have that right to choose. And as I said before, under advisement from healthcare and applicable family. But the decision is the woman's, and that's the end of the story for me. So it's not a point. So in my reading, I actually came across a Canadian website in this one, and what they said is for pro-choice individuals believe in all aspects of sexual and reproductive health and rights, which is something you alluded to, Kathy, including the belief that an individual faced with an unintended pregnancy should be able to make their own decision about whether or not to continue the pregnancy to term. Pro-choice people recognize and support individuals in making their own choice when it comes to the 3 options that exist when facing an unplanned pregnancy: abortion, adoption, and parenting. To be pro-choice means to be pro-abortion when people need to access them, and being pro-choice supports for parents and family when those people choose to continue the pregnancy. So, is it a crime? Is it murder? Can we separate it from the religious rhetoric?
Well, first of all, it's not murder. We're looking at pregnant persons, and fetuses and embryos are not persons. That would be the one argument, as well as my entire body is mine, and everything in it is mine. And fetus does not have the rights, because if you give a fetus rights, every single right you give to that fetus is a right you take away from a pregnant person. So I seen down in Tennessee, they had some sort of law that if you were using drugs, that they basically put in the law, if you're using drugs, they could throw you in jail. But the idea was to get you treatment, and they ended up having to reverse that law because people
Yes.
were avoiding prenatal care. And it's
I
like,
wrote a paper on that. Yes.
These laws aren't not protecting the fetus, because if they were, they would be saying, okay, we want to have healthy fetuses. We're going to put money in there so that addicted people can seek treatment. Not jail. They're not going to get treated in jail. But that's not where they're going with that, because they really don't care about the fetus unless it's inside somebody. So your example with the slide of embryos and the real baby, they don't care about either one.
Yeah. Well, I think this was a point you alluded to when we were messaging back and forth during the week, was that using inflammatory words like killing or murder to describe an abortion, like you said, inaccurately equates an embryo, something that has the potential to become a person, with an actual person.
Yes.
And then
and one thing that
go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, one thing the aunties bring up is, oh, well, when you're pregnant with a wanted pregnancy, you call it a baby right from the beginning. And my argument to that would be, well, when I make a cake in the kitchen, I put the batter in the pan, stick it in the oven. I call it a cake, but I'm certainly not going to serve the cake until it's done. And I can decide halfway through baking that cake that it's no longer something I want to do.
Morgan, maybe you can clarify if I'm reading the comments in the chats right. Right. Yeah. Overall, I know, like, Roe v. Wade and Planned Parenthood for Casey for federal, but is abortion a state's issue?
Yes and no. I'll give you a typical lawyer answer. Yes and no.
Okay.
So it depends. Yeah. So the Supreme Court, for their guidelines, because, as somebody else in the chat said, I've been told, the Supreme Court can't make law. Again, yes and no. So it's they can't make laws, like, in the sense that a legislature can make laws, but they can make certain guidelines. They can set parameters. They can interpret the law. They, have the power to strike down laws, that kind of thing. So with that said, yeah. So what Roe, Casey basically reaffirmed Roe, and it said, so here's the thing, first trimester, you have, basically you have a right to an abortion. Second trimester, it gets a little bit more iffy. I think it's like with a doctor's, permission, all that kind of stuff. Third trimester, it is, it's, only to protect the life of the mother, or if it's, absolutely not viable. So that was the parameter set by the Supreme Court in Casey. And then also states can kind of determine their laws as well. As in a way, they said, I believe the quote is, they're allowed to put their thumb on the scale in favor of one or the other. Is essentially saying, basically they're allowed to have, basically their interest of the unborn can, they can put their thumb on the scale on that interest. So yeah, it's complicated, but yeah, states can come up with their own sort of regulations and regulate, and that's how you get things like admitting privileges and fetal heartbeat bills and things like that. And also wanted to bring up something that was brought up by Atheist News in chat. He says, so many southern states passing laws that essentially say when Roe v. Wade is overturned, blah, blah, blah. It's crazy. So what these are called trigger laws. So basically, Mississippi has one. I believe Alabama does. And I think even maybe a few Midwestern states like Indiana might. But essentially, a trigger law says when Roe v. Wade is overturned, we're going to put in place an abortion ban. Basically, so what's going to happen is if Roe v. Wade or Casey or, all these, cases are overturned, then what's going to happen is abortion will be immediately banned in my state. So there are states that are going through, and I think New York is one of them. I believe Oregon, changing the laws to say that abortion's protected no matter, what the federal government does, essentially, no matter if Roe v. Wade is overturned, because that's another thing that anti-choice people like to use is this whole states' rights language and saying, oh, well, it's up to the state, or, oh, if you don't like it, move. Moving is very expensive. Like, I just moved furniture from within my state 3 hours away, and it cost me a buttload of money. So this whole just move or just travel thing is nonsense, but there are certain anti-choicers who do like to use that states' rights language to kind of uphold bigotry, which they use that with LGBTQ rights, they do that with race, they do that with different minimum wage provisions. I mean, you name it. They always use that to support bigotry.
Interesting.
So in Canada, we've got similar in that when they go after federal laws, that's when they're trying to criminalize abortion. But because the provinces are in charge of healthcare, that's when they do their attacks on barriers. And they're learning from what they see down in the US for things that they're going after. Yeah. And it's like foot in the door techniques is what one of the right-wing candidates called it. So they'll just slowly chip away. And right now they're trying to go after, make sex ed inaccessible. And as well, the Gay Straight Alliance clubs, they're wanting parental consent. But so the province is where they can make the most impact. And then I think they would go federally after that. But when it comes to barriers, if you're poor and young, you're not going to be able to get an abortion anyway, the way it's set up. Like in Canada, if you live near a bigger center like Calgary or Edmonton, yes, you can get one because you're right in town. But if you're in a smaller city, maybe 3 hours away, you have to travel down to Edmonton or Calgary. You have to find accommodation. You have to explain your absence from your community for a couple of days. And come up with the money to travel and pay for hotels. Mm-hmm. So right away, the choice is taken away. And I would even argue that they remove the choice when they go into the schools with abstinence ed. That's when they're removing choice from people because they're keeping them ignorant.
Now, is it determined by the school board how they do sex education, or is it done by, are there province laws or are there federal laws that deal with that?
By province.
It's by province?
Yeah. And then the school boards can interpret. So what ran into the problem in our particular school board is that we had anti-choice people on the board and at some point, and they had made the policy at the local school board that abstinence should be emphasized. So when they said it should be emphasized, because of course it's got to be included. Abstinence is part of comprehensive sex ed. But to say it had to be emphasized opened the door for the crisis pregnancy centers to be in there. And people don't realize, like some parents, they think, oh, well, they're just telling the kids not to have sex and that's a good thing. Well, they're not just telling the kids not to have sex. They're making judgment calls for the kids and they're lying about contraception. So when the kids do have sex, it's unprepared and they're likely to have something bad happen. Yeah. Well, and with comprehensive sex ed, we all know that they delay first time and the number of partners even.
That's good. I mean, two of my coworkers were very, very young mothers. One was still in high school, and it was basically, while she had a basic understanding, she didn't realize that just because boyfriend at the time didn't insert, she could still get pregnant because it wasn't taught properly.
Yeah.
And it's like...
Yeah, so the kids are forced away from the kids, eh?
Yeah. Well, and the thing is, and what I don't know if this is an issue up in Canada, but here in the States, and especially in the Southern Bloc, or what we call the Bible Belt, is that anal sex is becoming, and they don't consider it sex because they're not.
God can't see it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, and there have been a couple of reports I had read, and this was a while ago, was that there were some horrendous injuries because, you know, the guy was too forceful or did it wrong. I don't quite know.
Yeah, because they're not getting an education on any of that
Yeah.
or anything. And yeah, it does cause harm, definitely. And they're also trying to build this culture of shame around it. And
Mhm.
even for kids who haven't been exposed to church or religious environments, you know, they're trying to bring it in and really emphasize that. And the argument I hear all the time is like, oh, well, they're too young, or oh, the parents should teach them. And meanwhile, it's like, no. Your average parents in Alabama or Mississippi are not teaching their children comprehensive sex ed because they never had comprehensive sex ed.
Well,
It's
speaking on
bananas.
parents teaching, back in my day, and granted, we're going back quite a few years, good 40, I got a book that was about, I'll say, 22 pages and didn't teach me diddly squat.
I was told to hold an aspirin between my knees.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
Let's not
basically,
focus on the girls, eh?
you know, for me, if it wasn't for hockey, because I really didn't even care about that stuff back then. I was so into hockey. All I cared about where I was going to get my next hockey stick from, because, you know, I was mid-season and I broke the 3 my dad bought me for Christmas. But I mean, if they were, I mean, and I know parents that, in fact, my one friend who is a couple years younger than me, maybe about 10, 12 years, she got the exact same book I did. It's like, that book didn't teach me diddly. I mean, granted, it wasn't the most comfortable subject to learn in high school, but at least I learned something.
Yeah.
So I got to be a byproduct of 90s conservative Ontario education. So they also did books. Yeah, the books were great. That's all I got. I got this giant book, and they decided to just encyclopedia drugs and sex into one book. And it was just basically like everything you shouldn't do. So it was like they would go over like all of the side effects of each of the drugs and how quickly they're going to kill you. And they wouldn't talk at all about like anxiety or why people did drugs in the first place. Because like you see adults smoking, but why are they smoking? Because smoking kills you. That's it. That's all they would teach you. And so you would have there was no A to B point for that whatsoever. Absolutely, just total scare tactic. Zero education on even what sex was. Literally, the sex pages in the book were a cross section of what a penis and a vagina look like under a micro, like whatever the the artsy section was, got like the full opes and all that lovely stuff, and then you get the nice dick pic with the hollow ball sack and all that. And you get to analyze everything. It's great. Yeah, that's all we got on sex. Okay, so somehow those two cross sections that bear no semblance to what I'm looking at between my legs somehow translates into baby appearing. Like there was no intermediate, zero education there.
Yeah, and that's what gets passed down if you rely on, in some cases solely, from chat room, what kids are being taught. So yeah, the schools need to be teaching it.
Well, and these anti-choice groups are organized against comprehensive sex ed, and we've seen some of that out in Ontario with Charles McVitie kind of thing, where they demonized and outright lied about what was being taught in sex ed. So when youth in kindergarten were being taught consent, they turned around and said, oh, well, they're just teaching kindergartners to go out and say yes to sex. And that's such a lie. And they got away with it. It got so bad that I remember the Star did myths versus fact on the curriculum, but they managed to whip people into a frenzy so much so that my own daughter out there asked me, what's going on with the sex ed?
And if you'd read it, if you'd actually read it,
and the curriculum was pretty vanilla, right?
It had nothing to do with sex. It was literally teaching kids, if Uncle whatever wants to hug you at Christmas and you don't want to hug, you can say no to that hug. That was the consent piece. It was really that simple. and they turned that into kids are having sex. Yeah.
Yeah, that's another thing that I hear all the time. If you have comprehensive sex ed, then you're just teaching them how to have sex. And I'm like, all right, they're not teaching them the Kama Sutra, like calm down. But, you know, it's like people here act crazy about it. They're just like, oh, well, then they'll want to do it. And I'm like, they already do, and that's why you get all these random weird myths that you hear. Like, it's like, oh, you can't get pregnant in a hot tub, or oh, you can't, you know, do this or that or the other. And it's just absolutely bananas, the, you know, old wives' tales that perpetuate, and, you know, this sort of culture of like shame and ignorance that you create.
Yeah. Well, we're gonna hit some of the myths in a little bit, but Kathy, you wanted to talk about the fetal heartbeat?
Oh, yeah. Okay, so we hear about these fetal heartbeat laws down there, and if people aren't following Dr. Jen Gunter, they definitely should.
Oh, yes.
She did a good article.
Great.
Yes. So she said that they shouldn't be calling them fetal heartbeat because at the time, like at 6 weeks, you're looking at a thickening near the yolk sac of like 2 electrical pulls. So like you're hearing something, but there's nothing there. And you can even grow a heart in a petri dish. So can we not throw out a petri dish? It's just a horrendous barrier that has no medical evidence behind it.
Petri dishes are sacred.
But it allows them to personify something that's just a few cells.
Yeah. Well, it's like a point you made in our emails back and forth about being blocked by someone you were talking with, and basically you asked I have this
I can tell you that story.
Yeah, go ahead, because I have this word really bizarre.
If you're not using contraception and you're sexually active in a heterosexual relationship, or where there's sperm and eggs involved, you're going to end up with a fertilized zygote likely at some point or other. And they figure about, is it half of the zygotes or maybe 2/3 of them fail to implant. So when they fail to implant, they're discarded with the rest of the menstrual tissue. So I asked Abby Johnson, so given that these zygotes are people in your view, are you having funerals for them? Like, do you do a little blessing by the garbage can when you throw your tampon out? Oh man, she got upset with me and she blocked me. But really, like if it's a person, why aren't they having a funeral for their pads? Yeah, I would like to know that, because they say from conception. Yeah. So
yeah, it's they don't, and that's why to me it's solely a medical decision, because when you start bringing in beliefs and ideologies and misinformation in 99.9% of the cases, you ask them a simple question like that and they have no answer.
Well, and here's another thing too. If they really believed that zygotes were persons, where's their advocacy to reduce the number of miscarriages? Right? They could be throwing all their money to help these people that want to have babies prevent miscarriages. I don't see any advocacy from these groups towards that.
Yeah. I mean, like I said in the beginning, I mean, I delve into this every now and then. I mean, I think the last time I did was really 3-4 years ago, but I kind of sort of keep an eye on it. But my other interests kind of usually sidetrack me. And when I started deep diving this week, it was just like the misinformation was just mind blowing, because it's like I said before the show, we could do 10 hours on this and barely scratch the surface. And one article, the Rewire article, I use kind of as an outline for trying to gather my thoughts, and they brought up 6 myths, and so I thought we could hit a few of them and hash them about and see what we come up with. And the first one was every major medical association here and abroad supports unfettered access to abortion care. Being pro-choice is a medical and public health imperative based on science and medicine. It's not an ideology. And we've kind of touched on that already, but is that something y'all agree with?
Oh, yeah.
Mhm. Yeah.
I know I'm talking to the
decision.
choir.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, and that's the thing. You got to take the in our case here in the States, the religious ideology out of it. Because I mean, personally, I have never. Is that me making all that noise?
No, my messenger keeps beeping, and I thought by getting out of Facebook it would stop, but
it's okay. I was just thinking it was me. I come up with some weird glitches for our show, so. But yeah, I mean, for me, I have never really seen a secular argument that I can accept, anyways, for the anti-abortion stance or anti-pro-choice stance. And it always comes down to an ideology, basically, of, well, it's murder. And we've already discussed that it's not. As Kathy said, it's basically putting, what's the word? Putting life where there isn't life. Making a thing into someone. And that's just not the case. And Kathy, you touched on this, that a vast majority of abortions in this country take place in the first trimester.
Mhm.
And one point you had made was about using the term late-term abortion or later term.
Yeah, the correct terminology would be a later abortion, because late term has a specific medical definition, and it's usually that time period just before, like, when delivery could happen, those couple of weeks, I believe, just before. Dr. Gunter has a good article on that. So later usually means maybe around 20 to 25 weeks.
Okay. And you touched on this as well, is limiting access to abortion makes complications more likely and endangering the patient.
Mm-hmm.
And, well, the biggest case right now is the girl down in Paraguay.
You don't want it. Pardon?
The girl down in Paraguay who is, at the time of conception, I think was 10, and is now 11, was forced to have a baby. And they said the medical complication. I'm sorry, you broke up a bit.
It's so sad, and this is another example where they really doubt the fetus and they don't care about the pregnant person, because by forcing an 11-year-old to carry to term, they're damaging her body in a way that a more mature person would not be damaged. And I understand it impacts their ability to have children later when they do want them. So it's really cruel, and she was, any child that comes in 11, you know they've been raped. There's a pregnancy care center in Ontario that brags about an 11-year-old mother, and it's so concerning. And I wonder if they even called the police.
Yeah.
Yeah, because something horrible happened, and what broke my heart about that, especially, was she was begging. This girl in Paraguay, she was saying, I want you to take out what the bad man put in me, and she didn't even have the language. I am not sure. I didn't see that, but I think it probably was a relative. I mean, usually it, statistically it tends to be a relative, but yeah, that's another concerning thing is, these crisis pregnancy centers that we see creeping up across the states, it looks like Canada too, is that they hide this kind of stuff and they perpetuate this culture of abuse and shame. And yeah, it's awful because, yeah, I guarantee you they probably did not call the police, because then, other authorities would have been involved in that and they wouldn't have had the control over her decisions. And when you're 11 years old, you're just going to trust, that these adults are looking out for your best interests.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, there's also the case of the Indian woman in, I believe it was Ireland, who miscarried, but they would not allow for an abortion because at the time it was outlawed in Ireland, and she ended up dying from sepsis.
And I've heard this happen with some of the Catholic hospitals in Edmonton, where it, or not in Edmonton, but in Alberta. One person complained to me that they said when they were miscarrying, they kept on getting sent home.
Yeah. Yeah, I think
there's this assumption if it's publicly funded, you're going to get full medical care and without any Bibles inserted.
Yeah. And it's like Morgan said earlier, is that here in the States, a lot of our hospitals are emerging. And in my area, one of the mergers was with a Catholic hospital that now has Catholic dictates.
And it doesn't matter what the doctor wants. Even if they're not Catholic, they can't go against the hospital rules.
Yeah, and I know if my original primary care doctor was affiliated with that hospital and she left. She's still in practice. She's solid, by herself, but that's why she left, because she couldn't. I don't think she was an atheist, but
she couldn't practice medicine how she wanted, essentially.
Yeah, she couldn't practice medicine is what it came down to.
Yeah,
and they're the hospital that are basically responsible for misdiagnosing my stroke. Took them 9 fucking months. Oh yeah, your MRI said.
So basically,
go ahead.
They don't support conscience rights for those that want to provide full care.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's mind blowing. I don't know how any doctor could even work under that.
Well, eventually you kind of have to. If your hospital's merging with another and you have a contract, you can't just
and that brings that whole mess.
Yeah, there's all kinds of crazy stuff with healthcare law. I know in the States, and it's probably similar to Canada as far as doctors' relationships with hospitals go. But and especially if you're in an underserved community, some of these doctors, they want to be in those communities, and sometimes that's the only hospital there is, and you just have to deal with it. And the thing is, there are certain abortions. I think there's a limit to there's a number of them that you can do at an OBGYN, I believe, depending on the circumstances, but I think that number per year is limited, and the type has to be limited and pretty non-invasive, I believe. So you have that issue as well. But it's with these hospital mergers, it is concerning, because you also have problems with women not being able to get hysterectomies or not being able to get tubal ligations, when it's most convenient and easier on the patient to get that done, such as after they've already had a child. Even after giving birth, they won't even do that. And, even though the doctor is like, yes, you should get that done, and this would be the easiest time for me to do it, the Catholic hospital is like, no, absolutely not. You can't do that for your patient, which is bananas. They're telling a doctor what they can and can't do with their patient when they are operating on sound medical advice.
Yeah. Well, that's an issue a friend of mine went through. She's about 20 years younger than I am, but she knew from her team, she did not want kids, period. Her boyfriend, now husband, did not want kids, period. At the time, the hospital was fully Catholic run. The hospital she dealt with was fully Catholic run, and she had a literally fight to get her tubes tied at 24. And it was like, her doctor's like, she needs this. There were some medical issues as well that they could fall back on, but she fought for 3 years. And finally the doctor left that hospital, went to a different one, which was 2 hours away, I think. And she traveled the 2 hours to have her tubes tied at a secular hospital, or non-religious affiliated. And it's just, it's nuts that our healthcare is being overrun by religious ideology, or any ideology for that matter.
We're seeing that in Alberta. Well, in Canada, we've got assisted dying laws, so that when you're terminally ill, you can
I was going to mention that. Good call.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In Edmonton, they forced a terminally ill patient out into the street to get their assessment. Like, it just is cruel and inhumane, and they get away with it.
Steve just reminded me of something I was going to ask you. You have mentioned the pregnancy centers versus like the clinics. Like, I forgot what they're called down here. Morgan, help me.
Crisis pregnancy centers.
Yes. Yeah, the crisis pregnancy centers, the ones that are religious run versus like an actual like Planned Parenthood. What's the difference between the two? Anyone can jump in on it.
Oh, all right. Okay, so the difference between a Planned Parenthood and a crisis pregnancy center, is a Planned Parenthood has doctors and other medical staff, certified counselors. They're not going to make a choice for you. They will give you the information, the pros and cons, like a medically ethical counseling session. So here's the pros and cons on each of these items. And you can often look on their website, and they will have decision-making tools like what kind of contraception to use, this and that. But if you go to a pregnancy care center, they won't give you the decision-making tools on their website. They want to make it look very much like they do have medical staff, but they don't. And you might see in the fine print at the bottom, this is not a medical clinic, or we do not have doctors. They try to hide their religious affiliation. So they want to try and get you in. So even when you contact their chat line, their goal is to get you in. Any decision-making tools before you get in the door, they want to make the decision for you. They'll do anything they can to get you in the door.
Yeah, here they do ultrasounds. They're a big fan of doing the ultrasound and it lying to you about how far along, or they'll lie and say you're early enough to still make a decision when you're not, you know, just to prevent, like, just flat out lying how far along you are, and about, you know, being like, oh, look, there's the baby. There you can see its head, and it's, you know, all this stuff, even if you can't. Like,
I wouldn't be surprised, like,
crazy.
they have a screen, like a pre-recorded screen with a picture of a fucking baby on it. Like, that would just be so easy to get ultrasound footage from an actual baby.
Yeah.
And reuse that, and any ignorant person wouldn't know the difference. Like, that's my baby, great.
Yeah, no one knows what the hell they're looking at on an ultrasound unless you're trained. Like, every time people post them on Facebook, I'm like, I don't know what I'm looking at. It could be a lasagna for all I know. But yeah, so they do the whole ultrasound, and they're, you know, and again, like you said earlier, you know, they'll be like, oh, we can get resources for you and all this stuff, and it's all just nonsense. It really is. How prevalent are they up in Canada?
Well, when we did this study, I think there was over 200 across Canada, and they're growing like they're like cockroaches. They just keep growing and growing. And up here, they're starting to get into maternity homes. Now we have 3 maternity homes right now in Alberta, I believe, and they're building 2 more.
What is a maternity home?
It's run by the Pregnancy Care Center. So if you have your decision made for you, or you decide you want to keep your pregnancy, they will provide housing for you until the baby's 6 weeks old or something. And then there's another one that wants to, like, they'll have a second phase where you can stay till the child's 2 years old. But we've seen that article, and I don't know if you read it, it's from The Nation, and they talked about how crisis pregnancy centers will use a lot of hooks to get you into these maternity homes, and then it becomes about adoption coercion. So it's nice that kids have a place to go to live, but there needs to be regulations so that this coercion doesn't happen. Maternity homes have a horrendous history of scooping babies and manipulating people out of their babies.
Yeah, and you see a lot of that in Ontario here in the women's shelters too. Especially, so poor homeless woman turned away, pregnant, needs help. Women's shelter is religiously run. So the only help they're going to give her is if she chooses to keep the baby. Otherwise, they might very well literally turn her out into the street, still pregnant, still homeless, depending on the situation.
Well, and even like they advertise these earn while you learn programs, and they get funding from people, and they get donations. And when you go in there, it's a religious program. You have to learn religion to get your diapers, and that's just heartless, right? If I donate diapers to an organization, I don't want them to be proselytized to. Give them the diapers.
Yeah, exactly.
Another concern with these maternity homes is that it could have the potential to give them legitimate government funding. And that will make them even more strong than they already are. And they already get tons of money from the churches.
And we're coming into that phase in Canadian politics similar to American politics, where you get sort of sick of the one color, so you vote for the other color. We're about to get the shitty color back in.
Yeah.
I'm betting Trudeau won't last long, and not enough people are fucking smart enough to vote NDP or Green. So we'll end up with blue again. Great. And that's just going to make all this shit even worse.
Yes.
That's
what we're looking at in Alberta too, and people don't care if they step on other people.
One of the questions from our chat room, it's a little bit off topic, but it's not.
Okay.
Solely asks, I have a ultrasound question. Do they do abortions blind? And have you ever heard of abortion survivors born alive? I will answer it as a second question, because funny you mentioned that, Solely, because I just read an article. Okay, it was from LifeSite News, which, if you know anything about LifeSite News, they are anti-pro-choice.
Fake news.
Yeah, beyond fake news. So they did an article on 4 alleged survivors of abortions. So out of curiosity, just for shits and giggles, I started doing some Google foo and tried to find the backstories to these individuals. And allegedly there are. Now, the one individual, and I don't remember the name, that I did a background search on, the criticisms of her narrative is that it was full of holes. That she supposedly survived a saline abortion, but yet she couldn't. The timeline changed as to certain things. She had no visible scars from the saline abortion, which will have a tendency, from what I understand, to burn you.
Does she have a belly button? Because then she probably wasn't aborted.
Yeah. But
just saying.
The one story that I've seen just recently, a lot of the alleged born alive stories are a little bit iffy. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but the 4 that LifeSite News, the 4 that LifeSite News was putting forth, how all their stories had holes in it. So you would really have to, like, if you find a similar article or the same article, if you hear of them, my suggestion would be do some background reading, find whatever you can on it. I mean, I don't know, Kathy, you said it doesn't happen?
No, it doesn't happen unless you're talking about the later inductions where you found out that the fetus has a fatal abnormality and they do an induction. or the delivery happens early and then they do comfort care, I think. But by the very definition of abortion, it is the termination of an active pregnancy prior to viability. So there is no, that partial birth abortion is just a lie made up by anti-choice. No doctor says it happens unless it's an anti-choice doctor, and you got to wonder, like the mainstream doctors, not from the fringe groups, say this doesn't happen.
Yeah,
and
so
I trust doctors.
It turns out Solely read probably the exact same article I did, because they mention one of the alleged survivors was a twin. Her twin, or his twin, I can't remember, was aborted, and she or he, I can't remember, survived. And that's why she was asking about the ultrasound, if they, but there's different procedures for abortion, correct?
Yeah, and also, wouldn't you, like, you do a follow-up appointment and check? Like, so I don't understand how the doctor's like, oops, missed one.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah. I didn't look into that narrative. I just kind of Googled the first two that was in the story, and basically based on that was like, yeah, there's some holes in these narratives that just don't quite fit the bill, which doesn't surprise me coming from LifeSite News. And I couldn't find any what we would consider legitimate sources for these stories. I mean,
they're not a bastion of journalism.
Yeah. So.
Well, and here's the thing too, like 90% of the abortions in Canada are done at the embryo stage.
Right.
So it does not survive the procedure. It cannot live outside the womb, right? So, and you might not even see it.
Yeah.
you know? Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you look at the other end of the abortion, where the later abortions, like 0.9 or 0.6%, 0.59, somewhere around there. I haven't looked at the latest stats. The latest stats have just been released. I haven't looked at them. But those are the ones where they'll induce, it's later in the pregnancy. A person can choose to have an induction or typical abortion, and if they have a labor induction, it's just like you would deliver any pregnancy, and it's not going to survive,
right,
because these are terminally ill fetuses.
Yeah.
But if in doubt, just ask the doctors. The doctors will tell you. It doesn't, like, the live partial birth is bullshit.
Yeah, I'm waiting to see if Jen jumps on that article, because obviously it's making its rounds to have someone bring up the same article that I read on a whim. So yeah. I'll be curious, because I know one of the articles that Jen Gunner put out, and I'll put a link to her website in the show notes, was talking, this one doctor said, you never have to abort a baby to save the mother's life. And Jen's like, yeah, you do. It's like, so they were going back and forth, but I'm curious to see if she'll jump on this recent LifeSite article just out of curiosity to clear up some of the...
Well, it's been an issue because I think there was a law passed in New York or something, and then the aunties were trying to claim that infanticide was occurring, which is
West Virginia.
It was Virginia. It was Virginia, and that's when they just started digging up the stuff about the governor and all that and the other. Yeah. It happened in Virginia, and the government of Virginia, everybody's acting a fool, but still, it was this, and I think the governor did say something that wasn't like correct language or the best language to use. I can't remember exactly what he said, but anti-choicers like clawed onto it, and they dragged that out in the mud for a while. So saying that, they're going to let people abort babies after parents take them home from the hospital. I'm like, what? Do you know how expensive it is to, like, in the United States to have a baby? Like, it's just people just believe the most ridiculous nonsense sometimes, and I'm like, everybody's dumb and nobody reads, and I hate everything.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, people don't. I mean, even just to have an abortion, it's not fucking cheap.
No.
I
And
mean,
and the insurance doesn't pay for it in a lot of places. Like, it's
exactly.
they won't let them. Like,
Yeah. Well, the Hyde Amendment, you know, you got that.
yeah, no federal funds can go towards an abortion. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's like,
We're very fortunate in Canada.
yeah, and that's one of the differences in Canada. They don't have anything like the Hyde Amendment, at least that I'm aware of.
No.
I should.
No, it's covered, and they have to cover it.
Yeah. Here, if, like, you know, I'm on Medicaid. If for some reason, I mean, unless my life was in danger, which it would be if I ever got pregnant, although it'd be a little hard at this age. I'm like 10 years past menopause, so, you know, they don't have that stipulation, whereas here we do. And like you said, Morgan, most insurances do not cover it.
Yeah, because then people call and, you know, these crazy anti-choicers, you know, I mean, they've blown up clinics for less.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it is kind of a safety risk to even, you know, provide care or provide coverage for it.
Yeah. I mean, I know a friend of mine had one, and if I remember correctly, and this is about 15 years ago, it was over $22,000.
Jesus. Yeah. And you know that's inflation, like with that, with how medical costs in the States are inflated so badly, it would have been more today.
Yeah. Well, what this like basically boils down to one of the myths that I've seen a lot, and it kind of irks me because I deal with bipolar, so anything with mental illness or mental health issues is really irksome, is that they say that women who get abortions will regret it and are more likely to suffer from mental health issues.
And perhaps they'd like to talk about the mental health issues that may come from a forced pregnancy.
Yeah, exactly.
Where your body is being damaged as you progress throughout the pregnancy. Yeah. And they make up that term, like the psychological organizations don't even recognize that. Yeah. And now the pro-choice movement does recognize that people would have a variety of feelings about their abortion. But there's a study on PLOS ONE that shows that it was a longitudinal study, and it shows that the people that were satisfied with their abortion decision is in the high 90s.
Yeah. Well, there's this was from the APA from 2008. As I said, some of my stats are a little old, so bear with me. They basically found that past studies claiming abortion causes depression and other mental health problems consistently failed to account for other risk factors, particularly a woman's medical history. And basically, the article that I got that citation from basically said that there's really no right or wrong way to, as you put it, feel.
Exactly. And you know what? I think that atheists should take some responsibility for the shame and fear they try and put on people for having an abortion. Where's their accountability?
Yeah.
Because one study I read that's where any regret might come from is these groups constantly hounding them and calling them names and stigmatizing them.
Yeah. Well, it's like my one coworker. She chose to have the baby at 17, and I give her all the credit in the world. She's a wonderful person, beautiful mom. But if she didn't have her mom and dad, the grandparents of the baby, she'd be a fucking mess. Because where I live, there is no support system. I mean, there as far as getting help, yeah, we have the welfare system, but that's it. I mean, she'd be on her own. I mean, this way, with her mom and dad's help, she was able to at least finish high school. And, you know.
Yeah, I'm in the same situation. I had a baby when I was 18, and without family support and white privilege and being middle class, I don't know where I would have ended up. I managed to get a college degree, but it wasn't without opposition from some of these social conservative types who don't want affordable housing. They don't want school subsidies. They basically want you to suffer after you have your baby too.
Yeah. Well, one thing I did find. Excuse me. We're gonna take over.
You gonna make it?
I swallowed wrong. Can you?
That's why you shouldn't smoke cigarettes.
You should vape. But
or turn off your camera every time you do something else. You know what? What?
It's legal up in Canada to have the different kind of tobacco.
It's just I don't want to encourage people, I guess.
Yeah, Jeff Sessions will come after us, even though he's not even Attorney General anymore. But yeah, so it's going back, I guess, to these crisis pregnancy centers. What are some things that people can do, I guess, to sort of combat that misinformation?
We've been encouraging people to go and review them on Google, review them on Yelp, review them on Facebook, so that when you do look up a pregnancy care center, it comes up as a religious organization, because they don't provide pregnancy care. They shouldn't even be allowed to call themselves pregnancy care centers, because there is no pregnancy care. So we get them to review them. Abortion Rights also has a list of all of the crisis pregnancy centers so that people can look there. And I believe they've got a list down in the States of all the fake clinics. Repro Action, I think, is doing it. So you can do that. We have also created a parent package for our website so that parents can get them out of their schools, because they've been very secretive. Like, after we went after pregnancy care centers, they took their core documents down, and the core documents are very telling as to what they believe. So it says right there in writing that they will not counsel or refer contraception, that they believe only a heterosexual family is God's plan for family. One man, one woman. So those kind of things get them in trouble with the schools and more likely to get blocked out. So we do have a parent package there, and people have used it. And then we've used social media as well to encourage parents to always ask their school, who is presenting sex ed in our school? Is it a crisis pregnancy center? Is it a pro-choice group? So that's been helpful from that point of view. But and we've been going after their funding as well. So if you find out that they're getting any sort of government grants or whatnot, well, in Canada anyway, we've been able to do letter writing campaigns to MOAs if it's provincial, MPs if it's federal, and we successfully got the Canada Summers Jobs grants removed from them. So things like that can help. And then as well, we went through all their tax returns and found out that they didn't even report their government funding on their tax returns. So that prompted another round of letter writing to the Canada Revenue Agency to ask them to remove the charity status and audit them. So we don't find out the results of these audits, but Revenue Canada, when you contact them, they're obligated to check it out. So we've been responsible for a fair bit of probing.
There's I just looked at their Repro Action Fake Clinic database, which it's great. They have their website, who they're affiliated with. So a lot of the groups that I'm seeing in my state particularly are with a group called Heartbeat International. And so, yeah, it seems like they're big, and they'll even have a link to their social media if they find it, their address, and the name of the pregnancy center. I have one in my town. It's called the Pregnancy Test Center. So Pregnancy Test Center, which I think I've even seen their ads. It's hilarious in the bathrooms of bars where it'll be like, pregnant, come here to get a pregnancy test. So they give you
what
a free pregnancy test and then guilt you.
When you see an organization offering pregnancy tests, the first thing you should ask them is, what are you going to do if I come out with a negative pregnancy test? Can you offer me contraception? And they'll probably backtrack on that or say, come into our unit and we'll talk about that. But they're not allowed to refer contraception. They oppose it.
See,
There's one other organization you need to know about, and that's CareNet, and that's another one of the affiliates.
Yeah, they have
so there's
one
CareNet
in Silver Creek.
Organization.
Yeah, it's called Center for Pregnancy Choices, which is an even more misleading name.
Oh, yeah. Have you seen endthelies.com? They did a campaign, and they actually had like a little test that you could do to see if you could identify the pregnancy care center. And even with the knowledge I have, I failed.
Oh
because they go out of their way to look like a regular clinic.
Well, I think that's where we're using Google, using Yelp, using whatever resources you have at hand to find out beforehand, before you get sucked into these hellholes, to, not utilize them. It's like, it seems some of the tactics that you guys are trying or doing in Canada might transfer over to the U.S. Do you guys work closely with any of the U.S. organizations?
At the national level, I believe they're in contact with NAF and NARAL.
Okay.
But from a provincial level, I'm not directly in contact with any of them.
Okay. Yeah, it would be interesting to see how much, tactic-wise, going after the funding and yada yada, we would be able to do down here. I mean, I'm not real familiar as to what they are attempting to do to shut them down, so to speak. Morgan, have you ever heard? I know there's been some, usually assemblies, where some of these bogus sex ed people come into the schools.
Yeah. So I've seen.
Is that going on a lot here in the States?
I wouldn't know as much because I did go to a private Christian school for my last 3 years of high school, but from what I've heard, I mean, especially because in several states, it's still against the law to teach comprehensive sex education. It's required by law, but it's abstinence only. So
right.
I imagine that there are these groups that are making probably quite a bit of money by going around doing a tour of these schools and saying, don't have sex or nobody's ever going to love you, basically, is, what these assemblies seem to be about. So.
Well, I know,
yeah.
I think it was Hammett Mita on Friendly Atheists. He did this was like a year or two ago, might have been longer, but I guess this one school, they had an assembly. Pretty much, basically, it was you go or you get ostracized. It was a public school, and they segregated the boys from the girls.
Mm-hmm.
And if I remember correctly, they told the girls a bunch of fucking bullshit, and slut shamed them by how they dressed, etc. And the boys was like, they did nothing. They put the whole onus on the girls.
Yeah, that's very typical. That's like they would it's very typical for them to slut shame girls more so than they would, per se boys. I mean, they'll tell boys like, oh, don't have sex before marriage, but it's not like this whole like, oh, you're practically smearing mud on your wedding dress and all this other like crazy stuff that I was taught, like, oh, you'll give away so many pieces of your heart, girls are different from boys, and that, all that nonsense. It's they're still very much, I think, spreading misinformation, and if we're not getting it from the schools, we're getting it from the churches or at home.
Well, it's just like Solly said in chat, I don't want the school to teach sex ed to my kids. I feel it's the parents' job to do so. And as I was about to write, yeah, I agree with that 100%. But the problem is, from my perspective, is that, and we talked about this a little bit earlier, but it goes to what some of the schools are teaching, is that it's not being taught at home. And so, therefore, the schools are teaching it, but they're doing a really shitty job in some cases.
Yeah, and some schools I think do perfectly great at it, but it seems to be, you know, it's still this very much like let's shame them and scare them and do this whole reefer madness thing around sex,
Yeah,
and
right.
yeah,
Do you
and
have
it's
do you have the
ineffective.
slut shaming issue as much up in Canada? Is frowning.
Well, that's what got me involved in everything, because they went into my daughter's school and told the girls that they should watch what they wear.
That's right.
Because the boys had no control. So apparently boys were like roving inseminators that couldn't control themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And it's harmful. It's harmful to the boys and the girls. And I saw an article as well. Can't remember the title, but they talked about the damage done from purity culture on marriages, where it impacts marriages. And I think most parents want their kids to have healthy relationships, healthy long-term relationships. And this purity culture was actually damaging them because they had embedded such negative views about sexuality.
There was an article recently written by a gentleman, I'd say maybe 2030s tops, and he said that how the purity culture that he was raised in and that he signed on to basically destroyed his marriage.
I believe it. Yeah.
I mean, he had such an unhealthy view of sex and sexuality and relating to his wife, or you know, the whole patriarchy bullshit that you get in a lot of the fundamentalist zealot churches, or the, you know, quiverful. I mean, he was like, yeah, our marriage lasted about 3 years. So it's like, yeah, that kind of stuff is very damaging, even later in life.
Well, you build your whole identity on your purity, and then now you're having sex. Like, how do you reconcile that?
Mm-hmm.
It shouldn't be seen as a bad thing.
Yeah.
But, you know, back to the parent thing, when people say, oh, well, the parent should teach. My view is that it should be a partnership between the parents and the school and the youth to make sure that this information is shared. Because even as a progressive parent that's aware of a lot, I miss things on the sexual health education.
Yeah.
And so parents can be helpful in sharing their own values with their children and letting the school share the facts. Because we don't really know. The teachers know what's going on in the school level.
Yeah.
We only know our own kid, and sometimes our kids aren't talking.
I think you used a really good word, partnership.
Yeah.
That's a good way of looking at it. So, but one of the issues you did bring up too, to jump topics again, which we will do quite a bit, is fetal pain.
Oh yeah. So here's my thoughts on that. We have an entire profession of doctors whose business it is to know when fetuses are having pain, because there are fetal surgeries that take place, and there are neonates, the premature babies that end up in the neonatal intensive care unit, and those doctors make it their business to know when it feels pain. And so I trust those doctors when they're saying that there is no pain, especially when you look at, okay, 90% of the abortions are done at the embryo stage. There's no connectors. And I believe the connectors, so that I believe they happen maybe 28 weeks. It's fairly late in the pregnancy. And by then it's only special circumstances that happens anyway. And so how are they going to anesthetize it? Because I was listening to Dr. Torres down in Utah, where they had made some law that you had to anesthetize a fetus before a termination. And she's like, well, how do I do that? Like, do I have to anesthetize the pregnant person? What if the pregnant person doesn't want any invasive procedure?
Right.
So how do you reconcile that? And it's silly, because are we giving pain relief to full-term infants that are being delivered vaginally and having their head pushed through a tiny hole?
Right.
Like, it makes no sense. I have yet to see them anesthetize fetus just before delivery. It just wouldn't make good sense. It's tough to come through that hole.
While we were talking, an article was actually published in the Wall Street Journal by a Ben Sass and Meghan McCain, daughter of the late Senator John McCain, wrote an op-ed for the Wall Street Journal Opinion together on the need to protect babies who survive abortions. She says this should not be a partisan issue. Please read here. Literally came up online at 9:05 p.m. my time.
Well, Jen will be responding to that. I can almost guarantee it. I can't wait to read it.
Or no, it was yesterday. Actually, it was published yesterday, but it's just now started circulating around the Twitter.
Yeah. And that's the thing, and that's what the initial gist of the Rewire article that I read was that basically what they said is much of what passes for conservative commentary in outlets like the New York Times, the Atlantic, Washington Post, and numerous other mainstream publications fail to engage in any facts at all. This is particularly astounding given the mountains of data and analysis both domestically and internationally on the medical, clinical, and public health imperatives of access to abortion care. The morbidity and morality associated with denying abortion care, which Kathy alluded to, improving the health of women and children, and to reduce poverty. Likewise, on cable news, you will hear even the most intelligent and otherwise informed host, which Meghan McCain is not, use language to describe abortion care that is flat out wrong.
The media is the biggest struggle, aren't they? You know, even when they do a pro-choice article, they will show a picture of a belly that looks like it's ready to deliver, 40 weeks at least.
Yeah.
And we have been challenging media. Abortion Rights Coalition of Canada has some stock photos that are more respectful, more accurate of the whole issue. And so when we see these huge pregnant bellies, we write into the media and ask them to change out the photo and make it more representative of the facts of abortion, which is like you've got a picture of a 6-week gestational sac. That's what you might see under a microscope.
Yeah, which you couldn't tell there's a woman who's 6 weeks pregnant and like me. So it's like, you just, it's bananas how they portray it as, just literally about to give birth at any second. And they're like, well, this is what it looks like when you're pregnant. Because we don't understand women's bodies. It's.
Well,
they never ask the question, though. They never ask these groups what they're doing to prevent unintended pregnancies. Never, ever.
Well, and they
are preaching the word of Jesus.
Yeah, Jesus, that's one of the points of this article that I read. They go, I don't know, and in the end, it doesn't matter. What matters is that journalism and journalists are, by definition, supposed to report the facts and base their arguments on facts. And even, like, excluding Fox, Breitbart, etc. Mainstream media, per se, is all about balance. Well, they're, or presenting both sides of debate. I deal with it with dealing with anti-vaxxers. There is no fucking debate, so quit offering a platform to
make it look like there is.
Yeah, and in my, from a purely medical and legal standpoint, there is no debate.
Well, when was the last time you see media pull out the flat earthers and say, when we're talking about space exploration, we better talk to the flat earthers because they think it's a fake. Like they don't do those balanced reporting with other fringe groups.
Yeah, it's just, as I said in the beginning, because we are getting close to our ending time. This topic, I should have known. The whole topic about pro-choice, whether to have or have not an abortion, is a personal decision in my opinion, but the non-facts or the misinformation or the outright lying that's being presented from the antis is it's huge. I spent probably, because I burned out by Thursday, I'd say about 65 hours just doing background reading, because this is, as I said, not an issue that I'm compared to my views on homosexuality in the Bible. I can do that in my sleep. But I really had to look to make sure that what I personally thought was grounded in medical fact. And that's, the only way to look at it, because there's so much clickbait and, just to sell a story. And I think it's just, it really takes away from the discussion when you have to wade through 3,000 articles just to find the answer to one simple question. And that's what I feel like a lot of women are having to do. Thoughts?
Well, and it's frustrating too, because if you Google abortion, the first thing that comes up are the crisis pregnancy centers and anti-choice.
Yep.
They have the money to boost these things, and a lot of pro-choice groups are running on no money and side of the desk activism. Whereas these groups, they have church money.
Right.
Lots of church money.
Right.
And in Canada, they're charities.
Yeah. Well, I think there's some that are considered charities. I'm not real.
Yeah, I don't know about that, but I'm sure even with like them, being sort of a subsidiary of a religious group, I'm sure they're still tax exempt, but yeah, it's just craziness. And then in California, I know there's a lawsuit where they were trying to get them to basically trying to get them on false advertising because they are making an appearance that they are a crisis pregnancy center. And there was a law passed that said they had to basically say that they were not a medical facility in big bold letters on the front of the door. And they were sued. And they sued the state of California. And I think so far they've won. So,
I was so excited when I saw that law, and so disappointed.
It's forced speech. They said it's compelled speech, and it violates the First Amendment because, as we all know, the First Amendment is there to let you say whatever the fuck you want to, regardless of if it's factual or true or harms people or any of that. That's what the First Amendment apparently means nowadays.
Yeah. Well, they can get away with it because then they pull the religion card, right? Because you couldn't just set up say a diabetic clinic, and then when people come in, you say, oh, it's all bunk, don't bother with that, eat as much as you want, don't bother exercising, it's they wouldn't get away with it with any other medical situation.
Yeah, which is a shame. But Kathy, we are coming up towards the end. And while I know you're primarily based in Canada, but we do have international listeners, where can people get more information?
Okay, so we are on Twitter, as well as we have websites. So Alberta Pro-Choice on Twitter is AB Pro-Choice, and our website is abprochoice.ca. abprochoice or abprochoice.ca. And I'm also on Twitter as Blue Skies 366, so Edmonton Pro-Choice. And Abortion Rights Coalition has a website which has some great resources. I know that you were looking at, you were doing a lot of reading. Well, they have, I think, around 100 position papers on different abortion topics. And their website can be found at www.arcc-cdac.ca.
And I will put those in the show notes if I haven't.
Pardon?
I'll put those in the show notes if I haven't already. I can't remember if I did or not.
Okay. So let me send them to you on Messenger just to make sure that I've given you the right ones.
Okay.
Or do I just put it in the group chat?
You can do that. I can pull them out of there as well. I think I did include them, but I was better safe than sorry. And I do have them from my notes too. But any closing thoughts?
Any closing thought? Every little bit of fighting that you can do against the misinformation is helpful. And I would suggest, and what we're telling people in Alberta, if you really want to do something for the pro-choice movement, get out there and volunteer with election campaigns. Whether it's the school board level, you can protect sex ed at the school board level. You can make sure that these anti-choice politicians never get to cut their teeth by becoming elected representatives. So we're going into a provincial election by May, and I believe the federal election will be by October. So find a pro-choice party, connect with them, donate. They'll take, even if you want to bake a dozen cookies and bring them down for snacks for the canvassers, so you don't have to be an extrovert going door to door. Any kind of help they can get is good. And raise awareness and challenge these candidates and challenge the media. The media needs to have accurate information. I put out a challenge the other day to media. Ask these groups what they're doing to prevent unintended pregnancies. So far, cricket.
Yeah, I think that's a good question to ask, even here in the States. Yeah, you want to pass out all this shit. Well, what are you going to do to stop the pregnancies?
Exactly. And then demand that policies be medically accurate. But they're just ignoring doctors even with some of this stuff.
Well, it was like today. I read it today. I think it came out the other day where the some science dude within our current administration isn't going to correct Donald Trump on climate change when he puts out bullshit information. Oh, that's not my job to correct him. What is your job then?
Well, and I think the base don't even care if they lie. The base that supports them don't care if they lie because they themselves are lying. Like the anti-choice that are pushing these candidates forward, they're lying.
Yeah.
And we've noticed something new in Canada in that they're starting to stack the policy conventions and the nomination meetings so that they can push forth the anti-choice policies and anti-choice candidates. So yeah, definitely get involved politically. It's not enough to just go out and vote. You got to get out there and get other people out to vote.
Excellent. Sam, where can we find you, honey?
Still here for now. I'm in the process of moving, so nothing new creative until then, but maybe soon.
Okay. And Miss Morgan, where can we find you?
You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Mostring. That's MOSTRING. And you can find me on Facebook at Morgan L. Stringer.
Excellent. And the easiest way to find me is on Twitter, Dune9998. That connects to my blog, Havoc and Chaos, where I like to highlight the abuses of the church, not necessarily just diddling priests, but everything I can find. And you can also find me on Facebook under Beth Hay Hambridge. And I signed up for a new social media site called MeWe. and I'm under Beth Hambridge there. I don't have any friends there yet, but I'm just basically posting blog posts. So I haven't really delved into it, but I'm testing that out just in case Facebook gets to be too bonkers. But and I also have YouTube. And if I finish Twats, which I didn't finish because I was knee deep in reading about this stuff, there will be a new episode up before next week. So with that, I will bid everybody adieu. And next week, if all goes according to plan, we will have Mr. Atheist News, Steve DeMarco on, and we're just going to bullshit about news. Kind of take a break from the deep dive into deep shit. So, yeah, I literally burned out by Thursday. I was like, holy moly. So, yeah, next week's going to be kind of a free-for-all with the news, so with Steve DeMarco, so we'll have some fun. But with that, I bid you all adieu. We don't have an outro tonight because, you know, Expert decided to tank on me. So I will see you all next week. Same time, same bat channel, and all that fun stuff. Have a good night, y'all.
Good night. Thank you.
Okay, come on. Oops, wrong button. I'm hitting the live button.